In my years as a part-time guitar teacher, I've obviously seen a lot of people come through, and teaching them chords is one thing, but getting them to change between them to form a song and to keep the time is quite another. And they generally end up with the same sort of problem. How do I change? I can't find this chord quickly enough. Well, there are methods, there are ways and means. Don't forget, this is a fine motor skill, so it requires a lot of practice. Let's have a look. I've got a D chord and then an A chord. So I play my D and then I move to my A. That's fine. How do we move from one to the other really quickly? Well, there are ways and means to do this. Now I've got the D chord here. I've got my first finger, my middle finger and my annular finger arranged in a triangle on the fretboard like this. So I've just got my 4 strings. There's my D chord. Now moving to the A chord where all 3 fingers are together. The way to do this is to move one of the fingers first and then the other 2 will follow. Don't be tempted to take the chord off and then try and reform the other chord, because actually what you're doing is you're putting a little break in your coordination, in your chord knowledge. Really, the best way to do it is to decide on one finger that you're going to move first and then move the other 2 into place. Now, you can do this in any method. You could say, well, I'm going to move my middle finger there and then the other 2 round the other side like that. So I've got D and then I've got either my index finger that moves across and that sort of thing. Now, after a while, you begin to be able to form these chords in mid-air, D to A. So you're lifting your fingers off and then replacing them down. That's the ideal way to do it. You don't want to sort of stretch one finger while you're trying to still hold another chord and then bring it across. But it's a way of actually giving yourself half a chance of getting these movements in place. If I go from D to G, that's quite a big stretch there. So you could go, well, D, if I move my index finger up to the 5th string and then use that as a pivot in order to move my hand round to get the other 2 fingers in place for G, that would work fine. So D to G. In the same way, if I've gone from D to A, but then I'm going to go to G, it's a case of practicing A to G as well. So you end up practicing all the combinations. In that case, I would just put my first finger there and then stretch my other 2 up. Now, of course, you've also got to maintain this idea that the fingers need to be always, as far as is humanly possible, to get them just behind the frets like this, rather than that, because you get that sort of buzzing and strings not quite making contact with the frets. So the easiest place to play any note is actually right behind the fret. So my D chord would be there and my G chord would be this, rather than... Then you have to start applying pressure, and as soon as your fingers turn inside out like that, trying to squash the strings, you kind of lost the battle. Your fingers are always going to be at their strongest and with the greatest sort of efficiency of pressure if you keep them arched at all times. So for example, D to E. Okay, well, my index finger only needs to move down a fret and then I bring my other 2 fingers into position like so. And then you begin to formulate these changes without looking. Ideally, when you're doing chord changes, there's no need to look at your strumming hand at all, because you're just strumming the strings. With a D chord, because the D chord only really works utterly properly with 4 strings only, it will work with the 5th string, but it's a little bit bottom heavy, but it definitely won't work with the 6th string, because that 6th string doesn't form part of the chord of D major. A major or minor chord has only 3 different notes in it. So a D chord has a D, an A D and an F sharp. So there are 2 Ds there with the other 2 remaining notes A and F sharp. Like that. So when you are strumming a D chord, a way that you could do this is to bring your thumb slightly round onto the 6th string, just to mute it, like that. so you can strum a D chord with confidence, knowing that you're not going to strike a string that's incorrect. Now, other chords have similar requirements. An A chord, for example, works really best with 5 strings rather than with the 6th. C chord, same thing, 5 strings, not 6. An E chord is fine because it uses all 6, and a G chord is absolutely fine as well. The reason behind this is because the bass note of the chord has to be the same note as the chord itself. So the bass note of C should be a C, which indeed it is on the 5th string, 3rd fret. Although the E, the open E, is actually a chord in C major, really, unless the chord says C with an E in the bass, which is that, you want a C chord. You can, with C, however, push this string, this finger slightly against this string, the 6th string, to actually mute that and circumvent that problem. So, guitar chords are, straightforward enough. Bringing your hand round is the best policy rather than trying to squeeze the neck like that. As soon as you try to squeeze the neck to get chord pressure, you've lost the game because all the pressure has to come from the top rather than from the side. So just bringing your thumb round to facilitate those chord changes. Fine motor skills are really, I've seen people trying to drag their fingers into place. If they're one chord, they sort of drag the other finger in, and it's not really the best way to do it because it implies that there's a problem with the position of this hand anyway. So there we are, a little bit about chords and about forming the changes between the chords, because after all, that is kind of where we need to be with guitar chords. It's fine just to know the chords, but to actually be able to strum them and to keep time is really important. Just one final thing, if you are going from D to A with 4 beats, you don't need to necessarily keep the shape right until the last minute before the A. You can actually have a little strum where it's just open strings. It's not all going to be that much of a headache to have that. I mean, if I try to do it instantly, that's the ideal, but as you can hear from the first example, it's not going to be the end of the world. And actually, it's good in this sort of guitar playing game to actually just go out and play the changes of chords, even if they're not quite there yet, because practice and working with a drummer, working with a band, it just really raises your game, sometimes without you even realizing at all.